What's going on, Guardians? It's Tizzle here, and in this video, I'm going to be showing you every way to stun an anti-barrier champion in Destiny 2. Now, way back when champions were introduced, the only way of stunning a champion was with certain artifact mods. I believe champions were introduced into the game with Shadowkeep, and at that time, there was only one weapon with intrinsic stunning capability, and that was Ariana's Vow. Back in the day, this was actually a go-to option because it allowed you to run a special weapon and still have something that could stun champs. Because back then, the artifact mods didn't have things like anti-barrier sniper, it was all double primary. So you're basically stuck with using whatever the artifact mods were for a given season. Bungie has since introduced a few more weapons with anti-barrier on them, and in Lightfall, they made one of the greatest changes to the game in terms of build crafting and build flexibility. That being intrinsic stunning capabilities being tied to our 3.0 subclass verbs. So in this video, I'm going to break down every single way to stun an anti-barrier champion. But before we go any further, let's talk about the changes that Bungie made. If we hover over the anti-barrier icon on the character menu, it shows all the ways to stun a barrier champion. So from our subclass verbs, we have volatile rounds tied to void, unraveling rounds tied to strand, and radiant tied to solar. This video will be broken up into 4 main sections: exotic weapons, exotic armor, weapon perks that activate subclass verbs, and abilities. These will be timestamped below so you can better find out the information that you're looking for. But if you want to see every possible way to stun a barrier champion, then just watch the video the whole way through. Barrier champs actually have the least amount of ways to be stunned with the new changes, so this video will be shorter than the others. A lot of work went into the testing, so if you find this video helpful, leaving a like and a subscription would be greatly appreciated. I did extremely thorough testing and tested everything that was theoretically possible, so hopefully I didn't miss anything. At the end, I will also include some things that you think might work, but that do not. We will start with exotic weapons, beginning in the kinetic slot and working our way down. So first we have a weapon that was so good it actually had to be nerfed, and that is Arbalest. This thing has Disruption Break built in and is in the kinetic slot, so it can proc Disruption Break for itself. It also one-shots any barrier shield no matter your light level, so it is highly effective at breaking barrier shields, and it reloads itself when you do so. This weapon is an absolute powerhouse. Speaking of very strong weapons, we have a weapon that was so shit that it actually had to be drastically buffed. I'm talking about Wishender. This thing got intrinsic anti-barrier last year and it jumped to the top of the Grandmaster meta. I'm not kidding, it went from never being used to being an absolute go-to. On a perfect draw, it too can one-shot barrier shields in Grandmaster content. But unlike Arbalest, it doesn't require special ammo. It also does a ton of body shot damage and over-penetrates targets. This is huge because it can one-shot red bars even in GMs, so it is great for ad clear. And the over-penetration of the arrows causes 3 hits in 1, which helps you charge your super extremely quickly. It's just an all-around monster of a weapon. And finally, we have the newly added Pulse Rifle Revision 0. This Pulse Rifle just got a buff to its 2-burst fire mode of 75%, and Pulse Rifles just received a 20% damage buff, so this thing is now a monster. On top of all that, its sniper shots just got a 25% damage buff, so this thing now hits like a truck. Level it up and craft the version you want because this thing is nasty. And speaking of crafting it, unfortunately you'll have to wait till Season 22 in the fall to get your hands on it if you don't have it already. Onto the energy slot, we have the OG anti-barrier weapon, Ariana's Vow. This thing is still strong, but it is overshadowed by other options these days. It's a relic of a bygone era of Destiny when we had a much more strict sandbox. That being said, it did just receive a 20% buff with the recent mid-season update buffing all hand cannons by 20%, and it still destroys on Hunter with Lucky Pants. I actually used that combo in the Warden of Nothing GM right before Lightfall just for fun. So it is still a decent option, and it has really good ammo economy. One thing I want to note too is the background footage for Ariana's Vow and Revision 0 was all before the buffs were implemented. And finally, we have the Lament Sword. This thing absolutely shreds, and it's one of my favorite weapons in the game. It has great ammo economy and deals huge damage. It also heals you when you deal damage, which is a big deal when you're using an aggro weapon like a sword in high-end content. Sadly, its swings do not penetrate Cabal shields for some reason. Hopefully Bungie fixes that one day. Also, you must use the revved attack to break a barrier shield. Regular swings won't do it. So that is going to be it for the exotics that can stun barrier champions, so now let's check out exotic armor pieces. We only have 3, and 2 aren't very good. First up is the Second Chance Gauntlets for Titan. This gives you 2 shield throws, and your shields can stun barrier champs. I assume 1 shield is all it takes, even in GMs, to stun a barrier, but I haven't tested that. It did only take one shield throw in my testing, but the Lost Sector was Void Burn that day. Either way, I hope it is just one shield regardless of the difficulty, because this option kinda sucks in my opinion regardless, because the shield throw has some pretty slow travel time, and that will allow the barrier to heal up. So if you're using this exotic at a distance, you either have to time it perfectly, or the barrier is going to regen some health. Next, we have the exotic Warlock Boots Rain of Fire, which can give you Radiant when you get a kill with a fusion rifle or linear fusion rifle. And being Radiant will give you anti-barrier rounds on any weapons that you don't already have an anti-champion mod equipped. Next, we have the Hunter chest piece, Gerfalcon's Hauberk. This exotic gives your weapons volatile rounds after you come out of invisibility, and hunters have a ton of ways to go invis. So you basically have volatile rounds on demand. So as long as you have a void weapon on, you can always be ready to stun a barrier champ. So next we have abilities, and unlike Overload and Unstoppable, Anti-Barrier doesn't have a lot of abilities that can break its shields. You really only have a few. The Fragment Echo of Instability, where getting a grenade kill gives you volatile rounds, though this is pretty inconsistent to get to proc when you need it, but would maybe work okay on a Controverse Hold Warlock. Next, we have the Strand Fragment Thread of Propagation, which gives you unraveling rounds for getting a powered melee kill. This is probably even more inconsistent. You have to get a powered melee kill right before stunning a barrier champ, as you can only have unraveling rounds for about 7 seconds. So if you don't have a powered melee charged and some weak adds around, you're screwed. Additionally, in the background footage, I have Overload Auto Rifle on from the artifact, and you can see that unraveling rounds don't work if it already has Overload. My auto rifle shots bounce off, but my machine gun is able to stun. Overall, I don't recommend this option. And lastly, we have Radiant. Ember of Torches will give you Radiant for dealing damage with a charged melee. What's so great about this is that you don't need a kill, so this is much easier to proc, especially on Titan with the Throwing Hammer. You can also use an Acrobat dodge on Hunter, which would also be a consistent way to get Radiant. So Radiant is by far the best option here. Though this season, Volatile Rounds isn't terrible either thanks to the artifact perk Volatile Flow. So say you didn't want to run Ember of Torches. If you're on Hunter, you can actually run the Lightweight Knife. This will make you Radiant if you get a precision hit, so you could throw a knife at the AB right before it shields, and then you'll be Radiant to break the shield. And finally, we have only one super that can stun a barrier champ, and that is the Well of Radiance. I tested every combination of Golden Gun, and nothing was able to proc a barrier shield. So now we have to talk about things that kind of work, because some of these strats can be quite effective. No, they do not pierce a barrier shield, but what they do is stop a barrier champ from shielding entirely. Any stasis freeze is really good at this, so something like Conditional Finality that can instantly freeze a barrier is really good for preventing them from shielding. Chill Clip and Cold Steel will apply slow first, so they may be able to shield before you get the freeze, but it is certainly doable. Any exotic that can freeze, so something like Winterbite could certainly be used. The new Titan Helmet, Cadmus Ridge Lance Cap, there are many options. The trick is practice and getting the timing right. A far easier method for prevention though is Suspend from Strand. Suspend is insanely effective and renders barrier champs pretty much useless. I highly recommend it. If you have content with Unstoppables and barriers, you just need a low cooldown on your Shackle Grenade, and you can basically keep suspending a barrier champ over and over again. So again, those are methods that kind of work. No, they're not technically anti-barrier because they don't pierce the shield, but they do allow you to kill a barrier champion without it putting up its shield. And these methods can be extremely viable if you craft your build in the right way. Armin GT soloed the Proving Grounds GM with no barrier weapon equipped, just Stasis Titan with the exotic helmet. And he also soloed Mars Battleground GM on a Strand Titan with no anti-barrier. So yes, it is very effective. So finally, that brings us to things that don't work but should. For this list, we only have one. Sadly, that is Collective Obligation. You are supposed to be able to leech Suppression, Weaken, and Volatile with this weapon. But when you leech Volatile, it doesn't apply Volatile rounds to the gun. It would be really nice if it did because you could pretty much have Volatile rounds on demand. I'm not sure if this is intended or not, but hopefully Bungie fixes it. And then, as always, there are the seasonal artifact mods that you can use. This season we have Anti-Barrier Pulse Rifle and Anti-Barrier Sidearm, both of which are pretty good options. And one thing I want to note is that if you do have a Pulse Rifle with Adaptive Munitions, that perk does work on barrier shields. Anyways, that is it for the list of every way to stun an anti-barrier champion in Lightfall. Maybe some new ways will be added in the future, and I might just make individual videos on those and link them in the description of this video if that time comes. But for now, I hope this video was helpful and informative, and if you learned something, then a like and subscription would be greatly appreciated. And if you watch all the way to the end, then I thank you so much for doing so. As always, happy champion stunning, and take care.